Matters with Paul Rosen.
Our diets, our Western diets in America are just really, you just don't realize how poor they really are.
What would you say to others who would like to feel better?
Sometimes you need to find the instruction. That's where the testing and everything comes in, because without that knowledge, there's no way I could have got to the point where I'm at today.
Straight talk about health.
And then I start preaching and telling them what I've been doing. And this guy named Paul Rosen has changed my life.
With your host, Paul Rosen.
By the way, the information contained in this program is not approved by the FDA, nor intended to treat, diagnose, or claim to cure any medical condition or disease as defined by Western medicine. However, skilled practitioners of many disciplines have found nutrition response testing to be a highly reliable supportive technology for assessing the health and fitness of the body's functional system.
Paul, let me run a few things by you here. Let me see if you've ever heard of these. The Grow Company Ollie the Owl, the Chico First Dreams Baby Bear, or the Lamaze Philip the Pelican. Do you know what these things are?
What the heck are
These
you
are
talking?
toys for infants. These are things you can buy for children as early or as young as 6 months old. You know what else you can get for your 6-month-old?
Ellie the elephant?
You can get that. You can also get a flu vaccination. The Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, says that children as young as 6 months can get a flu vaccination. How do you feel about that?
We're going to talk about that.
We're going to talk about that. I have a feeling you have some thoughts.
I'm shocked that you actually, were so accurate in your, introductory remarks.
I'm just going to
our main
let that
topic.
go. I'm just going to let that slide right by me and not worry about it. We're also going to hear from our friend Frontier Pete in just a moment.
Go.
Okay, here we go.
A moment with me, Frontier Pete, all natural woodsman, enjoying a visit from my urban hipster nephew, Repeat.
Hey, Uncle Frontier Pete. Boy, lots of trees out here.
Repeat, time you learn a few things about the natural lifestyle.
Well, I have to take this, Pete. My girlfriend, Stacy.
Hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
Bad time.
Bad time.
Later, then.
Okay, Pete.
Anyway, it's important that you respect the environment.
Oh, just a sec, Pete.
Hey, is this later enough?
You know, Stacy there sounds like a robot.
I'm a synthetic cybernetic organism.
That's a robot.
Okay, Mr. Fascist.
Is that Frontier Pete? Your old, smelly uncle?
No, he's really not that old.
That sounds like a warning light on your dashboard.
Gotta run. Baby. Oil change.
Car maintenance is essential, sweetie.
Oh, yeah. I'll get one for the car, too.
Okay, Pete.
Repeat, you're just not suited for the outdoors.
Oh, break my heart, dude. Stacy, you okay?
Baby, this oil thing is bad. I'm slowing down.
Be right there, sweetie. Meanwhile, just use the grease can for my scooter.
Okay.
Gotta run, Pete. Glad we got to rough it for a while in the woods.
We've been in the parking lot at the lodge for 5 minutes.
Yeah, no espresso stand even. You savage.
There you go. I guess hipster dudes are dating synthetic cybernetic organisms these days.
Pete and Repeat.
Pete and Repeat is urban hipster nephew. There you go.
Some of you folks may remember or may be alerted to the fact that I did a show on vaccinations not that long ago. But recently I've had so many people ask me about whether or not they should be getting vaccinations or who should be getting vaccinations. Or anyway, the topic vaccinations has come up that I felt compelled to bring up the topic again and add some additional information. The other reason that I felt compelled to talk about vaccinations is because people should always be on guard when threats of a mass nature in the media, which have been made just recently, for example, about what they should be doing and how they will die or should be killed or should be lynched or should be whatever if they don't do this or if they do that. That type of bullying has never sat well with me, and hopefully, folks, you out there can agree with me on that. Bullying is not the way to make a an intelligent decision about anything.
So from that, Paul, I think you've seen some advertising saying if you don't get your flu shot this year, you're setting yourself up for all kinds of grief. And it almost sounds like, from what you're saying, some of this advertising was very aggressive.
Extremely aggressive. In Boston, for example, the Boston Herald called for threatening violence to people who didn't get their vaccination. It was pretty overt.
What threatening violence is in saying, hey, you're not getting your vaccination, therefore you may get sick and make the rest of us sick. So
which is the trope that bulliers have been using, consistently. The idea that if you don't get a flu vaccination, and I do, that you're somehow a threat to me. Right, doesn't really make sense on the front side, especially if you consider that getting the flu vaccination is supposed to be a defense against the flu. Yeah, meaning whether or not you get sick, right? For example, what happens if a person who gets the flu vaccination gets sick, which, by the way, occurs more often than you would imagine? Are they now somehow a risk to the rest of us who got our flu vaccination? Of course, the answer to that question is, what kind of thinking are we talking about here?
Advertising is aggressive to begin with, but even I, Paul, have kind of a problem with that kind of aggressive approach, or using peer pressure, or saying you represent a danger to others if you fail to get a flu vaccination. As we know, the flu evolves every year. That virus evolves every year, and even the makers of flu vaccinations will concede they're often trying to fix last year's problems. They don't necessarily know how the vaccination will change over the course of a year, so the vaccines they prepare aren't even necessarily correct for addressing this year's flu.
The issues are, this is actually, I pulled up what the Boston Herald basically said. This was in response to the measles vaccination, not the flu vaccination. But in any case, said, vaccines don't cause autism. Measles can kill, and lying to vulnerable people about the health and safety of their children ought to be a hanging offense. They were making reference to an outbreak of measles in the Somali population in Minnesota. But ought to be, here, this is the statement. Lying to vulnerable people about the health and safety of their children ought to be a hanging offense. We can chronicle a lot of manipulating the truth, if not downright lying, by many people in power in the medical establishment. Should we hang them?
No, I'm not in favor of hanging anybody under any circumstances, quite frankly.
This bullying tactic is not just limited to the press or the media. It's basically every time you walk in your doctor's office when the nurse says, or the doctor says, have you gotten your flu vaccine yet? Right? It's the name and shame approach, all with the assumption, right? Even they are making the assumption that vaccinations are safe and effective. So what you want is you want to go back to that premise. You want to go back to that premise. You want to go, are vaccinations really safe? Right? And show me the science. Show me the science that says that vaccinations are truly safe.
There's also a push on by some big pharmacy chains to get early flu vaccinations, meaning in August or September, you should go ahead and get your flu vaccine and set yourself up for the winter. But experts are divided, they say, as to whether or not getting that flu vaccine so early will be effective at all. And let's take that separately from the fact that flu vaccinations may be not effective in any event. But if you're getting that flu vaccine so early in the season, you're really not prepared for when flu season peaks later in winter.
Well, again, let's go back to the question of safe and effective. I introduced the segment by saying that, folks, did you know that the pharmaceutical companies are basically given a free pass? That is to say, if you have an adverse reaction to their product, vaccine product, essentially you have no right to go back and sue for damages. The pharmaceutical companies have basically been given a free pass by, in the wisdom of the legislature back in the mid-1980s. Any harm caused or created by a vaccine product, essentially the pharmaceutical companies are given immunity.
Well, it's pretty horrifying that a big industry like that would be given such legal protection when their product isn't necessarily safe.
This is what the Supreme Court said. The reason drug makers and doctors were granted wholesale immunity against liability was because Congress and the Supreme Court concluded that government-licensed vaccines are, quote, unavoidably unsafe, and vaccine makers therefore should not be liable for vaccine injuries and deaths resulting from governmental mandated vaccines.
So they're saying this product is fundamentally unsafe, and you should know that going in, so you accept that risk. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing?
This is a quote. This is a quote from the inimitable Supremes, I'm guessing, I don't know if it's in upholding the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act when it was challenged. Yeah, so the Supreme Court concluded that. I'll read this again, folks. You've heard correctly. You don't need to clean your ears. That the Supreme Court concluded that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe, and therefore the vaccine makers and the doctors who dispatch these vaccines are given full immunity from any harm that they may cause to the vaccinatee.
I do know, Paul, there's a legal thing called willing assumption of the risk. For example, if you go to a baseball game and get hit in the head with a baseball, they're not liable. The owners of the park, nor the team, nor the player who hit the ball, those people are not legally liable for your damages because you assume that could happen when you entered the ballpark. So maybe this ruling is somewhat like that. They're saying this product is unsafe. If you choose to use it, there may be benefits, maybe not. The company says there will be. But if you become ill or have adverse effects, we've told you it's unsafe, so it's on you.
But that would all be well and good, Rod, except for one glaring problem.
Which is?
States are beginning to pass mandatory vaccination laws.
Now that you mention it, New York State, back this summer, back earlier in the year, a few months ago, they mandated that children using New York State-sponsored preschools can be compelled to accept a flu vaccination.
So your example now loses its effectiveness, right? So if you can say, well, I know from statistics that X amount of people are going to get injured or killed when they fly on a plane. But you also hear it's so much safer to fly on a plane than to get in a car and drive on the streets.
And to be more specific, the New York State Supreme Court ruled that New York City Board of Health and Health Department officials can mandate annual flu vaccines for children in city-regulated daycare and preschool.
So therefore, in the Supreme Court's own words, parents and children, right, are being forced to incur the unavoidably unsafeness of the vaccines that are presented.
And when you say Supreme Court in this case, you're referring to the New York State Supreme Court.
No, I'm referring to the United States Supreme Court.
Okay, let me bring it back then to this particular ruling by the New York State Supreme Court. Your children, if they're in a New York State regulated preschool or daycare, must have their flu vaccination by December 31st. And also, Paul, you must, as a family, show proof that you have provided your child with that vaccination.
So let's move forward on this notion that vaccines are accepted to be safe and effective. We have now proven that they are unavoidably unsafe. So says the Supremes.
The Supreme Court says so, while also these other state boards in New York, for example, are saying you have to get the flu vaccination under certain conditions.
So now let's talk about effectiveness. Now, the CDC's own stats, when ferreted out from the some of the biased arguments that are presented, basically say that the effectiveness of the flu vaccine, right, across all groups, is 40+%, 40 to 44% in its good days, right? Although there is some claim that 1 year they were, higher than that. In other words, you have less than a coin flip's worth of chance that even if you get vaccinated, that you're going to be that you're going to have some kind of immunity to the the flu bug. The other thing is that the chance, in other words, the chance that you're not going to be effectively immune from the bug, is greater than the chance that you will be effectively immune, and that immunity is accepted even by the pro-vaccination community to be temporary. Whereas if you actually get exposed to the flu, that flu virus, and get the flu, or get a mild case, or barely even know you've got it, or a major case, you obtain full immunity from that strain of virus going forward.
So I don't know what the odds are in terms of other things we could compare it to, but a 40% chance doesn't seem very good.
44 is the highest that I could find.
Well, I beg your pardon, not
research.
40, 44. Let's make sure that's very clear.
Right.
44% chance.
So the next argument that you hear is about this herd effect. That is, if you vaccinate the herd, right, the more people you vaccinate, the more protection that you'll get from whatever bug you're being vaccinated against. And because we already know, right, this argument is just a statement. There's no proof of herd immunity. No proof that substantiates herd immunity. No one has ever presented proof to me when I've asked, right? Because it sounds so good, doesn't it? Like, off the top, on the surface, the more people we can get vaccinated, to the flu, the safer all of us are going to be. Well, here's an example of a different vaccination, right, which seems to violate the herd immunity. It was 90% of the children who contracted whooping cough in the 2012 outbreak in Vermont were vaccinated.
Well, that's too bad, isn't it, that they went out and bothered to get the vaccination, but it didn't seem to help them with their whooping cough.
Of 178 confirmed cases of pertussis in children aged 6 months to 18 years, 160 of them were vaccinated.
Against whooping cough, I assume. Is that correct?
There are other examples here. But my point is in science, the tendency to want to round off numbers, right, or exclude the studies that don't seem to back the theory, to me, in the context of the layperson's recognition, and I consider the Supreme Court laypersons when it comes to medicine, and medical science, they were persuaded by all the information provided to them that vaccines were unavoidably unsafe, and therefore gave the vaccinators and the vaccine producers immunity from liability in any way.
So, based on what you're saying, Paul, can we make the statement that flu vaccinations are not only often ineffective, they could be harmful?
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, my question to you and those of you listening out there is, do you feel that you should be forced, under some sort of penalty or pain, to undergo a procedure which is clearly not shown to be, or accepted rather, to be unsafe? And should anything occur, a minor, major injury or death, should you be forced to engage in that activity? That's the question. That's the question I pose.
I would say in the New York State example, all you have to do if you don't want your child to be compelled to have a vaccination is make sure your child is not in a New York State-sponsored preschool or daycare. So you still kind of have an option, and I suspect under all these cases where somebody's compelled to take a vaccination, you have the option of not choosing to use that service.
And what group of people do you think is going to lose out?
That'll be poorer people.
Exactly.
Because they're going to be the ones most likely to use, for example, New York State-sponsored
exactly.
preschools.
And not just poor people, middle-class people. People who can't afford either to homeschool. In other words, mom or dad can't stay home and school their kids because they got to go out and work for a living.
And right. And by saying poor people, maybe that's too much of a pejorative that I'm using there. It could be just about anybody. If you, in New York, are using one of these state-sponsored facilities for your children, yeah, you could be compelled to make your child have a vaccine.
In 1986, Congress created a federal vaccine injury compensation program. That's what occurred in 1986. It was in 2011 that the U.S. Supreme Court completely shielded the pharmaceutical industry from all civil liability for injuries and deaths caused by FDA-licensed vaccines, and the VICP has been systematically gutted. The VICP is the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. So although they created the program, they continue to limit the funding for that program. And when you are injured, and the process of utilizing that program is extremely complicated and secure and circuitous. It's something, without assistance, it's really hard to even, get through that system. So,
also, you mentioned the swine flu outbreak back in the 70s, Paul.
I
was
did.
Back in 76, I've learned, and it started with a couple of soldiers at Fort Dix, New Jersey. They were diagnosed with swine flu. Everybody got excited about it. Congress allocated $137 million in 1976 dollars in order for millions of Americans to get the swine flu vaccination. And basically it turned out to be a big scare. I mean, there was no need to be so concerned. So we went ahead and did this. We got some vintage audio of somebody actually receiving the swine flu vaccination in 1976.
You were able to dig that out
I was able to dig that out.
Wow,
so
okay.
Here's what it sounded like when you got the swine flu vaccination 42 years ago. It was pretty rough. Yeah, they were pretty harsh back then.
That was pulled out of what archive?
Vaccination.
What archive was that?
I'm not sure. Probably the random...
The swine flu archive?
The random... really not credible archive. I think that's the one. But it's kind of a good example, I think, of almost mass hysteria over something that really wasn't a problem at all.
And the question is risk. First, as we stated earlier in the hour, you have to accept the fact that these vaccines are safe, and there is some question as to whether or not they are. They're up to this point, since the time that the compensation program, national compensation program was instituted, right? Billions of dollars have been paid out to victims who were injured by vaccinations. You know, ultimately, what can you do? What can you do other than, say, get vaccinated to, prevent getting the flu?
I would say there are probably, I'm going to guess, dietary things you can do, and probably things to shore up your
Was
health.
I that obvious?
And make yourself
you mean because this program is Health Matters?
You could make yourself less susceptible to the flu, is that right?
Yes, of course. Nutrition. Right? If you want to, and we've talked about this many times, if you want to strengthen your immune system, the first thing you have to do is watch what you put in your mouth. That's the first thing that you have to do. So improve nutrition. And improved sanitation.
And thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Right.
Abruptly switching topics.
Improved access to clean water, proper child care, and, of course, dealing with less stressful, because stress does come into it, stressful working conditions. These 5 things are the things that have shown over time to be infinitely more effective than any vaccine that man or woman has ever produced.
One more note, you can get a free chapter of Paul Rosen's book, The Missing Piece. Just go to his website, acunatural.com, acunatural.com, and fill out the dialog box that pops up. Rest assured, no information you provide will ever be shared with anyone else. So, what are you waiting for? Get going on your personal road to wellness today.